I think music is probably, arguably, the only thing that can bring all of us together right now, better than anything can. I don't mean to sound melodramatic, but I really believe it's a huge part of the solution. There is nothing like going downstairs to our concert hall and seeing it full of people who, by the way, are from different backgrounds. I'm sure they have different political beliefs. They have plenty of differences. I joke that they may have been fighting online about something maybe an hour ago, and they're all feeling the same thing or something similar on a very human level when they're listening to a concert together.
Tony Mazzocchi, welcome to From Vision to Creation. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me today.
Thanks, Alex. It was really great to be here.
You've had an incredible career as a Grammy-nominated trombonist, performing with ensembles like the Los Angeles Philharmonic and on Broadway. And today you're helping reshape what music education can look like as president and CEO of Kaufman Music Center. I'm really excited to talk about your journey and the vision behind the work that you're doing.
I'm excited to talk to you about it too. It's been a twisty, turny life.
I want to start at the beginning. Take us back to your childhood and talk to us about what first drew you to music.
Okay, well, I came from I would say, a household without a lot of music in it. My parents were both big community organizers in the labor movement. Although my dad loved opera, he went to see opera in person most of the time. So I was just telling the story the other day of how I grew up without a record player or a tape player for a long time. And when I finally got one, I was around 8 or 9 years old, which was congruent with me starting the trombone through my public school in the 4th grade. And that really opened up just a completely new world to me, as a lot of people who listen to music, that happens to. And again, I started playing trombone through my public school. I certainly liked it a lot. I fell in love with it later on, but that was really the beginning of my journey. And that was the first kind of music we had in our household on a daily basis. Luckily, my parents supported it as much as they could. We didn't have a lot of money, but I was able to get just what I needed, so that by the time I got to high school, I became quite serious about it and knew that I wanted to be a professional trombone player, even though I didn't exactly know what that was even going to be. I went to music conservatory. Was very lucky to have been accepted to the Manhattan School of Music here in New York City. And I was trained as a classical and jazz trombonist. And I thought that was going to be my path. And certainly I was lucky enough for that to be my career for a little time. It seemed a little one-dimensional to me at a point. Funny enough, I was living in Los Angeles and doing it, and something was missing. I just didn't know what. And I got a phone call to come back to New York City, which I kind of wanted to do. But it was actually to start a band in a middle school, a Title I middle school in Brooklyn. I had no idea how to do that. I never taught anything, and I certainly didn't teach other instruments. But I took the job just to get back to New York City. And to make a long story short, I stayed there for 10 years. I fell deeply in love with it, even though the first day, the principal marched about 100 students into the classroom, and I had to teach them all their instruments from scratch. But that really opened my eyes up to the world of education and how separate the professional music world was from K-12 education. And later found that, when I learned really how to teach and communicate to students from all different backgrounds and all different socioeconomic statuses, that we were able to create an incredible program that changed every student in it, and certainly the entire community around it. That changed my worldview forever, and I began the path that I'm on now.
I always find it interesting how somebody so first of all, figuring out what you're most passionate about is its own thing, and sometimes it can take a while. But then after you figure out what you're passionate about, there's then another frame of mind or a chapter, if you will, that you need to enter where you decide, okay, I'm going to pursue what I'm passionate about. Because sometimes people have a passion, but maybe they're too afraid to pursue it because it's not conventional. Not only do you know what your passion is, not only did you decide that you're going to pursue it, but you also decided that you were going to try and make a difference in the schools in the school systems in New York in doing so. At what point do you feel that you realized that music wasn't just something that you were passionate about, but it was something that you wanted to pursue as a career and use as a vehicle to drive change?
Well, that's a really great question because it really happened in two phases. There was passion as a musician, and then there was passion as a musician educator. And so I'll talk about the latter because, I was surprised how passionate I was about it. And the moment really happened my second or third year into teaching this middle school. Again, it was a real melting pot of people at this middle school. It was Title I, which means a lot of the students were on free reduced lunch. And something was fundamental about the way I approached it at first. I had a low expectation of what children were capable of for a lot of reasons. I thought, oh my gosh, they made any kind of sound, great. And it went on. And I had a low expectation of what students from underserved communities could do as well. And in both cases, I was absolutely wrong. And when I dug into how to break down what I do and how I do it for all learners, and when I found that there was absolutely no cap on the potential of these students, and when I heard them creating beautiful sounds, making beautiful music at this young age, in this group, really of 100 students in this city school, it changed my worldview as far as equity and excellence and all of it. And then when I saw the school culture change through that, I realized that a few things were true in society. Number one, I realized that most people thought that music was for some and not for everybody. But in this school, it became for everybody. That musical talent was right for some. I was also wrong about that, and so was everybody around me. And then when I realized that every school in the city could be doing the same thing and transforming their school around it and wasn't doing that, there my passion hit. And I just was on a mission, not only to try to figure out how to scale this work, but actually to understand why these myths existed. And it just so happened it's baked in to the system. When you offer music 1 day out of 5 days a week in school at the youngest ages, what do you think is going to happen? We're actually going to teach it out of the youngest citizens, right? Not nurture it within them. And I got so passionate about it, I ran for public office and Board of Education in New Jersey to understand why the legislation is the way it is, where the funding was, and really found out that this was more about changing minds and less about changing the law in some cases. And, I couldn't unsee what I saw in my own school, and that's what's driven me since then.
You just mentioned two things that I find very interesting, and I want to dive in a little further. The first being that being able to be musically inclined or talented in music is reserved for the select few. I've always thought that that was true as well. Let's dive into that. So you think that the reason that this myth has occurred, or maybe it's become true in a sense, is that we haven't been placing enough emphasis on music education?
So I think that when we talk about talent, what does that mean? When we see somebody performing on an instrument really well, we say, Well, they're talented. But how did that happen? Were they born that way, or was it nurtured over time? Of course, there are people who are naturally gifted at something that excel, but there are people who perhaps weren't naturally gifted who spend the 10,000 hours, as we say, and all of a sudden their hard work is paid off. Well, they're talented too. So, what is talent exactly? And I think that too many people think that it's just inherent and inborn and not nurtured and grown. So, that's the first thing I'd like to kind of redefine what that actually means. And then we all know people who say, "Well, I'm not musically, gifted," and then all of a sudden, their child one day comes home with an instrument and they make a noise out of the instrument for the first time, which most of us did, and it doesn't sound really good. And they might say, "You see, they're not talented musically, just like I wasn't talented musically," and this becomes a generational myth. So, yes, I firmly believe that with very few exceptions, that everybody is born creative and everyone is born with the potential for a talent. And because we de-emphasize specifically the arts in schools, that we solidify this myth. Because I always say, if we took any subject in school and made it a half an hour one day a week, I'm sure that people would think that they're not good at that too.
I love this perspective because it's actually really liberating and freeing, because it just goes to show that with most things, if you set your mind to it, you can master it and you can become amazingly talented at something, even if you didn't have just the natural disposition to be talented. Because to your point, of course, some people, they can just play sports really well, easier than other kids, or instruments too. Like some things come easier to some people, but it is a very empowering belief to say that if you want to learn how to do something, you too can become talented if you're putting in the work. And a lot of people that listen to this show are younger people who are just starting their careers. And I think that it's important for people in that area of life to also hear this, because just because you're not good at something when you start doesn't mean that you can't be if you try.
Absolutely. There was a book that I read that really changed my thinking on this. It's called The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle, I believe. And really what he argues is the same thing, is that greatness isn't innate, but it's developed through a process of, deep practice, very good teaching, obviously, and which is informed by brain science and, kind of myelin in the brain, and these synapses firing, et cetera. So absolutely, I believe that. And, what if we kind of changed our mindset in this country about talent and took that approach in school? Perhaps we've been teaching it out of everybody instead of nurturing it in them. I think we need that now more than ever. And I think that AI is giving us a chance to actually explore this, actually. There's a real moment here, because I've been thinking, I hate to transition right to AI, right? But I've been thinking, if every student has access to the same AI tools, which they soon will, the differentiator won't be technology. It's going to be the human being using it. And what human capacities do we need to be developing in school because of that? And I think music plays a big role.
Tony, you said something else that I also thought was really interesting. You were talking about how you witnessed that music education could transform a school culture. Can you take us back to that moment where it clicked for you? Was there a particular exchange or a trend that you noticed? What made you realize that?
When I started teaching at this middle school, we had band 1 or 2 days a week. And some students were involved and many were not, which really reinforces, right, the talents for some, not for others. And what we did was the principal and I worked to expand it to 5 days a week. There was a lot of creative scheduling that needed to go on. It was revenue, it was cost neutral. And we developed this band program for 5 days a week where we were able to offer it for 5 periods a day. And the next thing you know, almost everybody in the school joined. Were these students all of a sudden talented who weren't anymore? The interest was there. There was a real appetite and passion for it. And so when it became part of the school culture, you'd walk into the school and there was, the display case with pictures of the band, large pictures of students performing music down every single hallway. 7:30 in the morning, we had a jazz ensemble. The teachers would walk in and go into the auditorium and listen to them play. The parents, the community just got around all of the performances. We didn't do 2 performances a year. We did about 15 performances a year. It became a real community event. So the entire culture of the school was changed. We worked very carefully with the teachers so that it wasn't a zero-sum game, right? We added more music didn't mean, oh my gosh, there was going to be less math instruction and we had to worry about that. And as it so happened, attendance improved, academic performance improved. Some of the students who were having so much difficulty somewhere else were thriving in the band program, and everybody saw it. And that's just the beginning of the changes. So the school ended up really being built around this musical community. And I just knew that it could be visual arts, it could be dance. The art form really doesn't matter, but the art form really drove the change.
That's so interesting. In a way, it's surprising, but in another way, it's actually not. Why do you think that things like attendance improved and you just started seeing a bunch of positive changes across the board?
Well, the attendance was kind of a no-brainer when the students knew that they were going to go directly into band as soon as they got to school. And students, we had de-zoned schools, so students traveled 2 hours, to school to get there. We started at 7 a.m. Attendance just improved because they knew that they played a crucial role in the greater whole. If a student, it didn't matter if they're playing 4th or 5th trumpet, they were just as an important piece of the ensemble. And if they weren't there, the ensemble would suffer. What other subjects do that? If you're not carrying your weight, everybody else suffers. And that's a very, very profound ensemble experience that only music can provide and the arts can provide. So I think attendance was just up because there was passion around the subject and they knew that they had a responsibility to a greater whole.
What do most people misunderstand about the role of the arts in education?
I think the talent piece is big. The first thing we have to say, talent is everywhere and access is not. And our job is to close that gap. I think as we talk about schools now and AI, I like to say that the future belongs, not to the most informed, but it belongs to the most creative, adaptable, and collaborative. And that is what the arts do. And the other thing is that arts don't exist in school so that you can be a professional artist or musician. That certainly is a side effect. And it doesn't exist just so that you become better at reading and math. It exists because it trains the human capacities that nothing else can do, and everything sprouts from that. And there's a real deep misunderstanding that that's what the arts exist to do, not to do something for something else, but in their unfettered form to do everything for the human.
Well, it's really interesting that, we know that the arts improves every single other aspect of your life, especially in education, yet creativity is being replaced by testing and metrics in most schools around the world. When did you begin noticing that shift happening in education?
Well, right when I started at around 2001, it was the beginning of the No Child Left Behind legislation at the federal level. And it really was the beginning of a hyper accountability model in education that really standardized everything. And of course, built schools around the standardized exams. Now, I do have problems with standardized tests. I have a lot of problems with standardized tests, but the biggest problem I have with standardized tests is the standardization that occurs in schools around the tests. And by that, I mean what we saw over the past 25 years was a narrowing of the curricula so that everything was guided towards the tests. So what goes? The arts goes, creative subjects go. And now, 25 years later, we actually don't see that student outcomes have even improved from that. And again, AI really gives us a moment of pause here to, talk about holistic human development. But certainly from 2001 until just a few years ago, I think the standardization movement really gutted curricula, guided resources and finances to a narrow set of what we call success in school. And I would argue it hasn't worked.
Since it's not working, why do you think arts programs are often the first thing to disappear when budgets get tight, especially considering that seeing that narrower curriculum doesn't necessarily result in positive student outcomes?
Well, I think that when you hold schools accountable for very specific metrics, right? And how have we judged school effectiveness is through standardized tests and quantifiable measures. So, school leaders by their very nature are going to say, this is what I'm being held accountable for. This is what I'm being rewarded for. This is where the resources go. It takes very specific people who most likely received arts training as they grew up, who are in school leadership, to say, no, this is valuable for the reasons why we say it's valuable, and I'm going to spend the money here. Where I've been disappointed is that I believe when you spend the money on more creative subjects and more arts, that it actually improves the outcomes anyway. And I think it's been misguided that if you want better reading scores, double the amount of reading in school. If you want better math scores, triple the amount of math. That hasn't been the case. I say offer a more breadth and depth in the curriculum. And it's not all about, the test scores. But anyway, I think we're at a point now, after 25 years of this, No Child Left Behind, and now the Every Student Succeeds Act, I think there's going to be more open minds about what this is. And I hate to say AI again, but when you add that in there, it does create this watershed moment of what should we be teaching? How should we be teaching it? And what subjects are most important for us to be able to, balance these human capacities that we educate during the school day.
Tony, if you could redesign the ideal school day for a child, what would it look like?
Well, what we're doing here at Special Music School at Kaufman Music Center is a pretty good exemplar. Thanks for the setup. We are the only K through 12 public school in the nation that infuses music deeply into each and every school day. And it just so happens that all of our academic outcomes are extraordinary. Our social emotional health of our students is fantastic. And schools would be wise to replicate this. And luckily, we're having the chance to scale this to another school in Harlem called PS 149 next year, where we'll be taking the Kaufman model and utilizing it there. So what does that look like? At K through 8, it's music every single day as a core part of the curriculum. That That differentiates us from most other K through fives where the average is 1 day a week for maybe 35 to 40 minutes. Private instruction free of charge for all of the students, that really is extra and makes us as magical as we are, but is a real core piece of it. And constant infusion of this and articulation between the academics and music. There's a real understanding and a culture here from all of the instructors, all of the administrators, all of the parents, that music is equalized in the school day. I believe that model can be employed and should be employed in every single school in the nation, especially at the K through 5 level. That's where the magic happens. That's where the neuroplasticity happens, as in the brain. That's where these myths are debunked about who this is for, right? If it's every day, people are going to think, wow, this is just part of me like everything else is. And that could have a profound effect on our education system. So we are a model for the nation. And I've been excited about talking about it and showing that to other people, because it's no accident then you surround these children with music every single day, everybody's life gets better.
And you've been talking about how students who study music perform better academically. Why do you think that is? Why does structured music training improve things like math, language, and executive function?
Well, there are a lot of studies that have been done that really bear this out. I'm not a scientist, but I love reading the studies, and clearly, musical training enhances academic outcomes. It is no doubt. But what we were talking about before is, if you care only about test scores, again, we have some of the best English and math proficiency rates in the state here at Special Music School. 100% proficiency in those, where the citywide average is around 48%. No accident that music plays a role there. We have 100% college graduation rate. High school graduation rate and college acceptance rate here at the high school. Music plays a profound role in that. But when you look deeper, right, I mean, it is a discipline. It is a face-to-face human activity. It requires collaboration. It requires all parts of your brain working at the same time, whether it's because of the tactile nature of it, reading music as almost like as a different language, performing and playing with others, performing in front of an audience. I mean, it requires every single part of your humanity in order to play or sing. And it's just no surprise to me that has profound effects on every other thing that's going on in school.
And Tony, for parents listening who want their children to explore music, what should they look for in a truly meaningful music program?
Well, that's a really good question. The first thing is that I would say a school that offers it more than once a week is very rare. But the more parents actually insist upon it, you'd be surprised that, schools can change that. So at the very youngest ages, students should be moving, singing, dancing. I would argue they're doing it anyway, right? It's amazing how creative children are by their very nature. And then at the youngest ages, for them to explore playing, violin or piano, flute, clarinet. They don't have to wait until the 4th or even the 5th grade or even the 6th grade in some school districts. They want to look at, how young are they starting them during the public school day? Now, if they're at a public school or private school or whatever, and they want to start them privately earlier than that, I say, go right ahead. I mean, 3 years old, 4 years old, they can explore movement, something called Dalcroze, and of course, performing on instruments. From there, everything kind of sprouts from there. But take a good look at the amount of time that the schools have it during the school day. What age do they start students on instruments, and how robust are those programs once you get into 6th grade and beyond?
What role should parents play in supporting creativity in their children without turning it into pressure?
A really good question. I actually even wrote a book about it because, there are a lot of pressures on parents. They're helping their child with homework, they're doing all of these things, and music is yet another. But I usually say, you're not a mathematician, you're helping your child with math homework. You don't need to be a musician to help your child with practice. The first thing I think is that mindset. Understand that this is just as an important piece of their education as everything else. So they should create some time for it every single day. At the youngest ages, dude, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, make it part of the routine. Learn something about it with your child. Maybe it's, learn how to hold the violin bow with them, learn how to, breathe if you're playing a wind instrument. There are little things that parents can learn. I don't think you need to sit there with them for the entire time, although, of course, that's helpful. But if you're in the kitchen, I always tell my friends, if you're in the kitchen doing dishes and, their kid is playing something in the other room and it sounds like it might be too fast, tell them to slow it down. But, make the practice just as part of the routine as everything else at the youngest ages, and a lot of it will take care of itself over time.
Yeah, that's a good point because I feel like if even something really fun, the second you start to put a lot of pressure behind it, it can start to feel more like a burden than it can a privilege. Um, so that's an interesting perspective on keeping it balanced while trying to incorporate it into a kid's life. And I think that there really is something to just starting something, even if you're only spending 5 to 10 minutes a day. When something becomes a part of your routine, it becomes something that you find a lot of joy and comfort in most of the time. So I agree with your philosophy.
Yeah, normalize it as part of your everyday life. And, a musical instrument, it is time. You have to kind of battle through a little bit of a struggle. And there's nothing wrong with that. As a matter of fact, I think we need a little more of that. But, 10 minutes a day over time at the youngest ages goes a really long way with most people.
Tony, what is something that music has taught you throughout the course of your life that nothing else could have?
That's a really good question. I don't think I've ever been asked that. But what's front of mind right now is that when we're looking at the world on a day-to-day basis, and we see, the divisions, and we see the pointing out of differences, and it just everything seems to be really exaggerated. I think that my life in and through music, and of course, when I see this happening with the children, um, I think music is probably, arguably, the only thing that can bring all of us together right now, better than anything can. I don't mean to sound melodramatic, but I really believe it's a huge part of the solution. There is nothing like going downstairs to our concert hall and seeing it full of people who, by the way, are from different backgrounds. I'm sure they have different political beliefs. They have plenty of differences. I joke that they may have been fighting online about something maybe an hour ago, and they're all feeling the same thing or something similar on a very human level when they're listening to a concert together. There is something there that we must harness and utilize for especially our youngest citizens. And music has taught me that it can be the great uniter like nothing else can.
I've talked about this on this show actually, and once I was in a theater in Manhattan, and I right before the play started, I overheard a conversation that people to the right of me were having. They had very different political views than I'd had, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, their point of view, it's so far off in one direction and it's kind of hateful and I can't believe it. And I started feeling almost, I don't want to say I wasn't feeling offended, but I just couldn't believe that these people felt this way and that they were verbalizing that in front of a bunch of people. And then when the play started, everybody was crying at the same time, laughing at the same time. And it made me realize that, yes, art does transcend our current state of mind, if you will, and brings us to a place where we're more in touch with ourselves and our humanity.
Music is for everyone. It is for everyone. It doesn't have borders, right? It is absolutely for everybody, and it's pretty extraordinary.
Tony, I want to go back to the AI subject for a second. Right now, AI can generate art, music, and writing. How does that change the importance of teaching human creativity, especially within a school system?
Well, I think that there's something about creating in real time, person to person, especially if we're talking about in school. First of all, of course, music can be created digitally, but when we're teaching, it's quite analog here, right? We're playing on instruments, we're singing together, eye to eye, face to face, no technology, no phones. That is a very, very different and magical process that is absolutely crucial. You have to have empathy. You have to have the ability to collaborate. You have to be able to listen very, very carefully. You have to be able to bring your best self to the ensemble, but also be listening around so that you help make other people feel better. Just play better. So yes, you can create music via AI and you can create art via AI. I'd like to think that there's a line there and that people will be able to sense that and it's not human enough. And I'm seeing that with young children right now. They can look at something on a computer like that's AI. And, and so it's very interesting. I think that the humanity in the performance face to face is irreplaceable and teaches qualities that we all need. And those qualities will be the human capacities that will be utilizing AI. So again, that creativity, in order to be able to use that technology, is exactly what we should be teaching.
When you arrive at a place in your mind, when you're putting together a project, writing a song, a play, whatever the case is, when you're trying to be creative or trying to tap into your creative problem solving skills in any capacity, there's a moment where you arrive at your edge, so to speak, where then it becomes difficult and it requires you to turn up your brain power to the next level so that you can overcome the obstacle in front of you, whether it's writer's block or just solving a mundane business problem, whatever it is, right? When you arrive at the edge and then you turn up the intensity and you arrive at the solution, there is something so gratifying about that moment. And it helps you to exercise a muscle in your mind to become better at problem solving, better at being creative. And I think that when you rely heavily on AI, it robs you of that moment. And I also agree that AI can only take you so far because it's just based on everything that's happened in the past. Whereas the real breakthroughs we see are when people are bringing something to life that did not exist previously.
Well, I agree. I've also been fascinated about some of the studies that have been coming out. I don't know if you've read this MIT study that showed brain activity while using AI. And of course, they had different groups utilizing it, but people who actually developed a paper using AI completely showed almost no brain activity. It was almost arguably brain atrophy would occur over time. And then a rewrite of something using AI showed very little brain activity. And then, of course, people not using it showed robust brain activity. So, on a very fundamental level, on brain chemistry, you're right. And so it's not just about feel. We need to be very cognizant of that because if we rob ourselves of creativity through this, you're correct. We're not going to break through anything.
So then, Tony, what is a good what's the middle ground? Because I think that AI can be a very powerful tool to replace certain steps in different processes that can be kind of mundane or repetitive. How can people and students specifically use AI as a way to help them achieve that next level of thinking versus numbing their minds?
Well, it seems like that's what everybody's grappling with right now, right? That is the essential question. And so as we sit here, I mean, I was just reading that New York City Public Schools put out their, plan on how students will be utilizing AI. And I think this is a real moving target. So time is going to tell. I don't feel necessarily qualified to answer that question, but I do feel very, very qualified in saying that when students learn music and when they learn all art forms, they're just not learning an art form, they're learning how to be human. And that learning how to be human, those human capacities, can only help how we utilize AI. If it's AI as part of the school day every single day, I think we're going to be doing a disservice to most people. I think what's old needs to be new again. A little bit less technology, but embracing it later on. But at the youngest ages, we need to be face to face, eye to eye, and engaging in creative activity that will help us later.
And what does leadership in the arts require that people might not expect, Tony?
Right now, leadership in the arts for me, my biggest challenge and opportunity is talking to what feels like 90% of the population who does not quite see why the arts are relevant to them, right? Why should I be engaging? Why should I be attending concerts? Why should my children be engaged in the arts? I think that people in the arts and in leadership are really good at talking to each other and preaching to our choir. But what we need to do is assert our relevance and really explain in some shared language why the arts are so important to humanity right now, especially for our youngest citizens. That's my challenge. The way I speak is slightly different when I'm talking to a legislator, than I'm talking to a parent, a fellow educator. But we need to be great communicators right now and really assert our relevance.
And when you look across the country at music education today, I know there's a lot that needs to change there, but what gives you hope?
Well, I just need to go downstairs into my school here every single day, and I have a ton of hope. It's just absolutely magical what we do here at Kaufman Special Music School. And every time I see children thriving during the school day, not after, not on the fringes, during the school day, I say this can be and should be happening everywhere. And look, there are pockets of real greatness around the country as far as arts immersion and integration in schools. This isn't a pie in the sky kind of idea. It's happening, and we need to see where it's happening, learn from those places, and scale that work together. And those leaders in those school districts need to help talk to other leaders to let them know why it's so important. We just need to harness it because it exists all over, especially right under my feet, literally.
What advice would you give to somebody who wants to make music a bigger part of their life, but they're not quite sure how to start?
Well, I would say um, the beautiful thing about the internet is it's all at our fingertips. So I often tell my friends, scour YouTube, listen to a lot of different music, think about what genre really kind of grabs you. Think about what sounds you really, really like. Watch videos of people playing instruments and see if that's something that may interest you, or whether it's singing or whether it's just listening and enjoying. I think there's so many ways to do it. And, it's all at our fingertips now, which is pretty extraordinary. Back in the day, we had to really seek it out. So see what you like. Don't be scared. And the best advice I ever got is, if you start engaging in musical training, no matter the age, it's going to not sound not so good at the beginning, and then it's going to get better. And be patient with that.
And Tony, what is the biggest life lesson you've learned so far?
I would say, if you really have seen something the way I've seen it, and you have a vision for how you think something should be, in my case, it's how schools should operate and where music sits in all of that. Meet as many like-minded people as humanly possible, learn from them, and galvanize them around this, because there's always somebody who actually believes what you believe as well. I've been doing this for decades, and as I told you, right now, there seems to be a moment where people are ready to listen, whereas it was really kind of uneven over the past 20 years. So I hate to sound cliche, but don't give up on that vision, because it's always possible. And I think right now we have a real moment where music can play a vital role in everybody's life. And I'm pretty excited about it and quite optimistic.
And where's the best place that people can keep up with you and everything you guys have going on at Kaufman Music Center?
Please visit kaufmanmusiccenter.org. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook. We have so much attention on us right now from different media outlets, including yourself. And if this is something that interests you, whether you're an educator or a parent that says, I want more of this in my school, contact us. We can be partners not only in advocacy, but in strategy as well. It's a real model here that we'd love to scale.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to include all of the links in the episode notes. So anybody who wants to quickly check it out, just click below. And Tony, if you can go back in time and offer your younger self one bit of advice specifically tailored to you and your life's trajectory, what would it be?
Don't have the blinders on. Even when I was growing up as a trombonist training, I appropriately was all in on that. And I think you do need to be all in on that. But just look to the left and the right sometime, because there are all these pathways that came my way that I kind of ignored. And later on, luckily, I caught up to myself and it happened. But, just don't be afraid to cross-train your skill set and look around, because, there's always something there that is a pathway to what may be your passion. And I accidentally fell into mine. I don't think it always needs to be an accident.
Well, Tony, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for doing this with us today.
Oh, it's been a really great pleasure. Thank you for the great questions.